This looks like one of them. Okay, well, hopefully this meeting will be appropriately recorded on their cloud. I've never done that before. I usually put it to our YouTube channel. Okay, well, welcome everybody. And uh, I'm afraid to ask you to stop sharing your screen, Ken. So we'll just proceed with it up there unless you're comfortable that you can stop it and start again. Uh, I'd like to welcome everyone to the joint meeting of the Maryland Heights and Creve Coeur Township Clubs. And also, I would like to introduce the president of, well, I'm Harvey Ferdman, president of the Maryland Heights Township Democratic Club. And Sydney Jackson, if you'd like to say hello, she's president of the Creve Coeur Democratic Township Club.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. And we traditionally start the meeting with Pledge of Allegiance. I don't want to interrupt Ken's screen at this time, so I'm not going to put the graphic up, but picture a flag, everybody, and I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And again, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your interest in preserving our democracy, little d democracy. That's very important. We'll start by having any elected officials who are on with us. If you would identify yourselves and let us know what office you hold. I know I saw some folks out there. LaDonna, I see you. You're muted, I guess. It's not working. Anyone else, elected officials, while LaDonna is getting unmuted? Okay. Well, LaDonna is a state representative in the Creve Coeur area, predominantly, right? Oh, there she is.
Had too much on my screen. Hi, everyone. I'm State Representative LaDonna Applebaum. I represent the Fighting 71st District, which encompasses most of Creve Coeur and unincorporated areas of north of Olive. And I'm happy to be here. Good to be with like-minded people. That's exactly like what I need right now is like people are asking me to give them pep talks. Well, I need a pep talk.
Okay.
Here and thank you.
Okay. Any other elected officials, please identify yourselves. Okay, I guess not a whole lot right now, which is somewhat reflective of the last election, I guess. Well, I have a couple of comments before we start, before I introduce Ken. First is many of you know that I am the founding member of Gateway Democrats, and our mission statement is to build momentum between elections. And the election just ended, and I think now more than ever we need to be building the momentum and keeping whatever momentum we do have. And to that end, we are planning an event in early January. You might want to mark your calendars. I think January 12th is a Sunday. It's that Sunday, potentially, hopefully. And the general gist is to have as many advocacy groups as we can get to set up tables around the outside of the room so you guys can find out who's doing what, give everybody a couple of minutes at the mic, and have them explain what they're doing. And hopefully there'll be places for you guys to take all this energy that we have, good and bad, and put it to some productive use with the advocacy agencies while we're in between elections. And hopefully we'll also be doing that hybrid. So we're hoping to be able to have a Zoom option for it live as well. So stay tuned. If you sign up for this, unless you object, I will add you to the email list for that when that event is ready to go. what else? The second thing is, unless Professor Warren contradicts me, which Ken, you're certainly welcome to do. It won't be the first time someone has contradicted me. Um, I think this whole thing with Matt Gaetz is a head fake. It's a distraction. I think that Mr. Trump is getting exactly what he wanted out of it, which is everyone's talking about that instead of the other real issues and real things that he's doing that need to be in the spotlight. Um, so that's my 2 cents. I think he already knows that Matt will never make it through Congress. But again, I may be wrong, and Ken, you're welcome to illuminate that. So with no further ado or comments from me, if anyone else has any announcements, now's a really good time. Okay, hearing none, I will introduce Ken. Ken Warren, as many of you know, is a local political science professor at St. Louis University. He has done polling for local and national candidates and news outlets. He's been on just about every media um, outlet that you can speak of and think of, and he's addressed this group many times, and we appreciate his time and knowledge. And Ken, I will turn the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you, Harvey. I first start out with a note, and the reason I do that is because political science is not an exact science. And so as a political scientist, I do my best to try to substantiate my points, rooting my points in statistics, facts, historical trends, in presidential elections with reasonable inferences rooted in electoral behavior studies. I've taught presidential elections at St. Louis University for many decades. I want to say that people I talk to have very different interpretations of what these election results mean. People who are informed have many different opinions. I respect those opinions. I frequently don't agree with them. But I do notice that there's a big difference between opinions given by people and by political scientists. Political scientists, again, are not exact scientists, but they do have, particularly if they taught in the subject area, an awful lot of studies in their minds. And they're aware of trends and these are very valuable in interpreting election results. Electoral behavior is a fascinating study. In fact, it's considered to be about the most advanced area in the social sciences. The reason for saying that is that behavior is quite predictable, meaning that we can, say how various groups will vote in a presidential election with a lot of accuracy, because there's consistency in terms of how Jews vote, how blacks vote, how Hispanics vote, how evangelicals vote, and so forth. And so election results can be based on, or predictions in particular, can be based on looking into how are these groups trending. Now, most times, which I'm going to explain in a minute, most times what we see is that you see that, for instance, well, it's been said, blacks didn't vote for Harris, but actually they, in great proportions, but they actually did. 85% of blacks voted for Harris. I will get into this in a minute, but 87% of blacks voted for Biden. So we will look into, black turnout. We'll look at other demographics to interpret this 2024 election and try to put it in historical perspective. I will hold up this book. This is a book that I've used in my presidential elections class. So there's a lot of meat in these books. And you can learn a lot by picking up a textbook if you're interested in reading it and learning about presidential elections from political scientists. The first thing I want to say is the media convey that the Democrats got trounced. In one sense, they did, but in another sense, they did not at all. Let's take a closer look at this. Point one here, Trump had an impressive electoral college win, suggesting that he won by a wide margin. But historically, the electoral college count is frequently very different than from the popular vote count. If you go back in presidential elections, and I will, I would suggest to you, you look at David Leap's presidential atlas, excuse me, that where he goes back all the way to George Washington, and you can look at presidential results nationwide by state and by counties in the state. You can look at the electoral college count, you can look at the popular vote count, and my point is that frequently you see a total disconnect between the electoral college count percentage and the popular vote percentage. You know, political scientists don't like the electoral college, and that's because it's inherently very undemocratic. I've mentioned this to you before, but to mention it to new people viewing this, the electoral college is inherently undemocratic because, again, if you lose, if you're a Republican and lose the state of California by one vote, theoretically you get no representation in the electoral college. And that is precisely why there's frequently a disconnect between the popular vote and the electoral college vote. There have been 5 presidential candidates who have won the popular vote and lost, going all the way back to Andrew Jackson in 1824. All of them been Democrats. So that's one of the reasons in polls, Democrats evidently are aware of that enough. And that's one of the reasons in polls it's shown that Democrats favor doing away with the electoral college a lot more than Republicans do. So in this particular election, Harris lost 312 to 226, 58% to 42%. But in the popular vote, Harris only lost by 1.74%. And by the way, that's changed. I had to change the statistics today because I did this PowerPoint presentation on Saturday, and it was 1.77. It's gone down to 1.74. More and more votes are still being counted. And so there's not the gap between turnout for Democrats and turnout for Republicans that there once was. So we a week ago when the election results came in, or last Tuesday, we saw that it looked like 69 million Democrats voted. Now it's up to over 73 million Democrats voted. So it's still a problem for Democrats. One of the reasons they lost is because Democrats didn't turn out like Republicans did. Let me go into this, a pet peeve of political scientists. Trump claims that he has a mandate to implement all sorts of policies, but he does not. Trump has vowed to enact sweeping conservative policies during his second term, describing his win as, quote, unprecedented and powerful mandate in his victory speech. Political scientists hate the word mandate. It became popular during the Eisenhower administration due to a book called Mandate for Change. Let me tell you why political scientists don't like the word mandate. Now, in that presidential elections book I just showed you, they have a whole section in it on why mandates make no sense, and any candidate really can't claim a mandate. So what is a mandate? A mandate is where you, in fact, have the consent of the people to enact certain public policies that you want. Candidates have claimed that they've gotten this mandate because they won. But political scientists will point this out. Roughly speaking, only half of the eligible voters vote in the election. So first of all, a mandate means that the people support what you're doing. Really? Only about half of the people vote in a presidential election. roughly only half of those people voted for you. And you do not know, you don't have a clue why they really voted for you. Study after study shows that. For instance, I have here MO to remind me, Missouri, to remind me the disconnect between the Republicans who swept in Missouri, and yet, and Republicans, supported certain policies. They were against, of course, the abortion rights amendment. So here you have the disconnect between policies that the Republicans didn't support, and yet voters voting overwhelmingly for the Republican candidates. It's difficult to explain this, except that people vote by party. Partisanship is the greatest determinant of vote choice. Image comes in second, and issues normally pointed out in textbooks comes in a distance last. People don't, as a pollster, I can tell you, people really don't know the issues very well. They can't really connect issues to candidates in terms of what they actually support, except in a very general sense. Now, certainly some people can. Some people follow politics very closely, but the vast majority do not. And textbooks will point out, as a result of studies, that about a third of the American people don't have a clue about politics. I mean, they can't name their U.S. representative. They can't name the 2 senators of the state. They have trouble naming the vice president. They have trouble, telling you how many people are on the Supreme Court or even how they got there. Harris lost by thin margins in the blue wall states of Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania. I want to emphasize this because a lot of my friends have gone around, they talk about this big blowout that Trump had in this election. Really? If Harris, in fact, won these 3 blue wall states, she would have won 270 electoral votes or the election. And look what she lost by. 0.1% in Wisconsin, 1.39% in Michigan, and 1.75% in Pennsylvania. She got 226 electoral votes, plus the 10 from Wisconsin, 15 from Michigan, and the 19 from Pennsylvania would have given her the minimum she needed to win, and she would have won the election regardless of what went on elsewhere, given the election results that we had. Pollsters predicted that it was going to be close, and it was close. But again, there's a disconnect between the Electoral College and the popular vote. So Trump won, squeaked by in all of these 7 battleground states. Well, Biden did the same thing, and it was close in 2020. So the reason Nate Silver could say, look, it could be a blowout either way, and I said the same thing. I had a hunch that Trump would win for a lot of reasons, other reasons I'm going to explain. But the bottom line is that Trump did not win in a blowout. And I think you can see this from these statistics. And the reason Nate Silver said, it could be a blowout either way is because trends develop early. And as soon as you saw that, again, I use New Hampshire as sort of a barometer. Harris won New Hampshire, but it wasn't called right away, and that's a hint that the Democrat is not doing very well. When Obama won in 2008, immediately, CNN and other networks, we're calling New Hampshire for Barack Obama. This didn't happen. It didn't happen in 2016 for Hillary Clinton. And I thought, we're in trouble. And so when we look at this election, however, my point is it was pretty close. And certainly Republicans should not feel very comfortable with winning that way, just as I felt that in 2020, Democrats shouldn't have felt very comfortable either, because Biden just squeaked by in these states. Americans are also obsessed with bashing pollsters. and they have been since 1948, when it was thought that the pollsters got it wrong. Actually, I wrote a book called In Defense of Public Opinion Polling, because every time I would speak to groups and be on the radio or TV, people would call up, or they would send me, you know, a text or an email saying that, you know, pollsters are always wrong and they're always getting it right. So I decided to write a book on it, you know, many years ago, with the pollsters standing up, like in vaudeville, with people chucking tomatoes at them. That was the cartoon that was on the front cover of the book. So I will defend pollsters against, you know, the criticism. Pollsters like myself, we're in business to get it right. We're not in business to get it wrong. And pollsters do something that very few other people do in their professions. They stick their necks out and make a call. And if they're wrong, like this woman who made the call in Iowa, I mean, it was what's called an outlier poll. Not as the other pollsters did not show what that woman showed. And of course, she showed, you know, Harris up by 3 percentage points in Iowa, which was just crazy, because other pollsters showed that Trump was easily going to win Iowa by 4 to 8 percentage points. So one of the reasons that people bash pollsters is that they don't understand polling, and particularly they don't understand what an error margin really represents. If you have a plus or minus 4% error margin at 95% confidence, what that means is what is shown, for instance, 50%, it could be 54% as a high, and it could be 46% as a low. So the sample I have here is, if Trump is shown at 51% and Harris is 49%, this means that Trump could have a high of 55% and a low of 47%, and we would be 95% confidence that the error would, if it occurred, would be in that range, with the probability being greatest that it would be at what exactly was shown. It's just that it can go one direction or the other direction. So it's very important to understand error margins, and not just remember that Harris was supposed to win this state. Well, yeah, Harris was supposed to win this state. Let me show you in the next slide. Here's realclearpolitics.com polling averages. Now, those are meaningful because that's when you're talking about pollsters got it wrong. Well, okay, pollsters got it wrong. You're talking about excuse me, all the pollsters that are clustered, and they take in Real Clear Politics, excuse me, takes these averages within you know, recent times, and they post an average. Well, here are the averages. So you can look at this for yourself, but you can see that every single one of those were well within the error margin, every one of them. Now, the same was true in 2020. They were within the error margin, but just the other way. That's how close it was. And I remind you once again, that's why Nate Silver, the polling group, said that it could be a landslide either way, because, you know, think of what pollsters do. They're calling an election, making a prediction before a single vote is cast. Before a single vote is cast. And American people are tough on pollsters, because they said, for instance, that Harris was going to win Wisconsin by 0.4, and she lost by 0.9. Really? And look at these other margins, how close they are. North Carolina, Trump was supposed to win by 1.2. He wins by 3.3. He's supposed to win Georgia, according to polls, by 1.3. He wins by 2.2. This one's off by the most, Arizona. But it's not really off that much. It's still well within the margin of error, plus or minus 4%, which is the normal error margin for pollsters. So why did Harris lose? We can only speculate. So pundits all have their opinions, but it really cannot be determined for certain why candidates won or lost. You can't, point out, we have students that are writing papers on why a person won or lost. And one student was doing an honors paper on it one time. And we were trying to explain to the person that in our committee that we had, that you can't really say why a candidate won or lost. You can speculate, but you can, in fact, say why a candidate won and lost. Why? Because there's so many different variables to consider. We look at what are called independent, dependent variables, and there's just a ton of there's a ton of independent variables that are linked to an outcome. And we come up with measures of association to determine what's mostly associated, let's say, with the win, or the loss. But there are so many also called intervening variables. You can't just, people are saying that all the time, and I understand it. I do the same thing, and I'm going to say that, tonight, but I'm only speculating. I'm not saying for certain that this is why a person won or lost. Political scientists can't say that. In fact, one way to explain this is that I used to ask students, does smoking cause cancer? Well, if you ask any doctor that who's knowledgeable about methodologies, they'll say no. Well, because what is actually established is a high or low relationship between smoking, let's say smoking cigarettes, and lung cancer. But you can't say smoking causes lung cancer. You can say that there's a high correlation, but you can't say it causes it, particularly when some people have smoked, as you know, 5 packs a day, practically all their life, and they never develop lung cancer. So that's what we do in the sciences, medical sciences, as well as social sciences. We develop relationships, correlations between variables. Let's the black vote. And we know that the blacks as a whole are going to vote for the Democratic candidate, but not all blacks are going to vote for the Democratic candidate. So for sake of time, what is being shown here is that these studies show that, I'm not going to open them up because I've already had enough trouble. One of the problems is that Harris is a black woman, not something she can help, but we do know from studies which are shown here. Studies have shown that Americans do discriminate against women, and they do discriminate against blacks. So now you have a situation where you have a black candidate. Now, discrimination is not high for blacks in the United States anymore. Although pollsters do know that people lie to pollsters about certain sensitive things, particularly when it goes against upholding a community standard. So some people, when asked in polls, will say they wouldn't vote against Harris because she's black, but would. So we do know there's errors in sensitive questions. Most times when pollsters ask questions, they don't have a problem getting true answers. And how do we know that? We know that because certain research tanks like Survey Research Center, University of Michigan, actually calls you up or conducts a poll in another way. But in order to test the accuracy in polling, they already know all the answers before they even ask you. They ask factual things to see whether you're lying about certain things, whether you voted last time, and all sorts of other things, your age, your party affiliation, all these things, they already know the answer, and they'll ask you these questions, and then they just go through essentially a checklist to find out how many answers were truthful and how many answers were not. But about race and voting for a woman, some people we know will say they up to uphold a community standard that they would vote for a woman, but in truth they would not, or a black. So again, if you go, Harvey's recording this. If you're curious, you can look at this, because what this shows is, let me just open this one. Let me see if this. So this one just shows that, the percentage of all elected officials that are Black women, and there's only 3.7%. Number of Black women ever elected governor of a state, 0. So, so number of Black women ever elected president, of course, it's 0 again. So the track record is certainly not very good for Black women. Do you have the screen now, or is it gone again?
No, the screen is gone.
Okay. That's why I didn't want to go to this thing, because I'm having a hard time finding the share again. It's not opening up for me. I stopped the share, so it should be off. Okay. Okay, so I'm not going to go to these. It's too much problem. I normally don't have problem
You still
going
want to
back
click
and forth on sharing screens, but
you
anyway,
still want to click the projector screen at the bottom right.
you can't see that.
No, we can see it, but it's not full screen. One more over. There you go.
Okay, another reason that Harris lost, again, you don't know for sure why a candidate lost, but these are contributing factors that you can't ignore. Okay, so she's a vice president. Vice presidents have a very dismal record in winning the presidency. And most VPs who won did it early in our history. Martin Van Buren was our sitting vice president under Andrew Jackson, and in 1836, he won the presidential election as a sitting vice president. But we went after that with all sorts of vice presidents running for the presidency. We went 152 years before H. Walker Bush won it in 1988. And he broke what was called the Van Buren jinx. In recent history, Nixon, Hubert Humphrey, Mondale, Gore, and Harris have all lost. Now, of course, Mondale, ran in against Reagan in 1984, and he lost, but he was a sitting vice president coming from the Carter administration. So why do these vice presidents lose? It's speculated that vice presidents are not chosen for their leadership, but for other reasons, like balancing a ticket. They most often are perceived as followers, not leaders. If you recall, George H. Walker Bush was considered in the 1980s as a wimp. Again, perceived as not a leader. Reagan was the leader. He was a vice president. He's perceived as a follower. So the image is not great for vice presidents. But worse, they are placed between a rock and a hard place because they must remain somewhat loyal, at least, to their administration, yet try to distance themselves from failed administration policies. Harris, of course, was most visibly seen in this precarious role. where she had to defend somewhat the administration. She couldn't just turn against it. That would look bad too. So she had to somehow distance herself from failed border security problems and inflation that was still, plaguing so many Americans. So again, she had a hard time winning. Let's go back to another guy who had a real problem defending his administration, Hubert H. Humphrey. And Humphrey, of course, notably, by the way, I'm so old, he spoke to my class, my American government class, after he lost that election in 1969. He lost in 68. I spoke in 1960. He spoke to my class, and he jokingly, he was very witty, he jokingly talked about I was a graduate student, by the way, when I was teaching there, but he spoke about, his troubles trying to distance himself from a very, very, very unpopular war, the Vietnam War. So it is difficult for a vice president to win because that person is still part of an administration and must try to defend it somewhat, but try to distance himself somewhat too. Very difficult task. In my previous talk to you, I talked about salient issues, and I mentioned that Trump had the most salient issues on his side. No question about it. He had border insecurity on his side. He had inflation on his side. Harris had a lot of non-salient issues on her side that I knew from the beginning were not going to work. Yes, people care about the abortion rights amendment. We, in fact, passed it in this state. Again, we passed it in this state to show you the disconnect between issues and voting for candidates. Republicans, of course, were against that amendment. Republicans all won by a lot, but people don't vote on the basis of issues when they voted for Republicans. That's why you don't know why they voted for these Republicans. Because certainly these Republicans stand for a lot of issues that Missourians don't even support, yet they won by a lot. And of course, Medicaid expansion is another example. So this issue, the abortion rights or reproductive rights, it only had 12.5% support in this poll. I cite it right here. That's way down from the support that the economy had, immigration had, crime had. So what is a salient issue? A salient issue is something that's meaningful to voters. The abortion rights did not mean a lot as a salient issue to most voters. In our own polling at SLU, I'm associate director of the St. Louis University poll, what we found was that it wasn't a deal breaker. In other words, Democrats felt, oh, this is a great issue for us. It certainly helped Democrats, no question. But it was a deal breaker in the sense that when we crosstabbed by the position people took on the overruling of Roe v. Wade, most Missourians by far were against overruling Roe v. Wade. But when we crosstabbed, we found that Republican women in particular, they said they didn't like the overruling of Roe v. Wade. Many of them did. And then when we crosstabbed, they were going to vote for Trump anyway. So it wasn't a deal breaker as Democrats thought it would be. Other issues that were less, were not salient were diversity issues, Black Lives Matter issues. When you look at who's voting out there, most voters are not Black. Many of the white males that Democrats have been losing are not supportive of issues like diversity issues, inclusion issues, Black Lives Matter issues. And I support all of those. And probably most of you do as Democrats, most of you Democrats. But I hope you understand from a political scientist perspective, when you look at the data, they are not the salient issues out there. And unless Democrats, stress more issues that matter to people, they're going to lose elections in the future. Now, again, you don't know why candidates win or lose. Biden won just 4 years ago, and a lot of Democrats won in 2018 and 2022. And again, Trump just won, when you look at the numbers, in this election. Another issue that's very interesting is democracy. When you look at exit poll data, you think that democracy was the Democratic issue, democracy as a concern. But the way Trump campaigned, it turned out that most people who had democracy down there actually voted for Trump. Look at the exit poll data. So that's interesting. Now, it was presented two ways, but when you look at one, they had democracy, and most of those people voted for Trump. Not by a much, but did. And that's because the Democrats thought, oh, well, the election's about concern over democracy, the future of democracy, which I think it is. But Trump, the way he campaigned, when you heard him speak, he talked about democracy was threatened by Democrats. Republicans were more inspired to vote than Democrats. This was found, so I wasn't surprised by this either. I remember watching this CNN young guy who crunches the numbers for CNN, and he was pointing out one day that Democrats were less enthusiastic in voting this year than Republicans. Well, guess what? Democrats did turn out a lot less this year. They had 81 million, turnout in 2020, and it fell to around 73 million this time around. 31% of the total vote cast by Democrats in 1924, but 37% of the total votes cast were cast by Democrats in 2020. That's a huge difference. And that accounts for, about 8 million votes different. So one of the reasons, those things are easy to draw conclusions from. I mean, clearly Democrats lost because fewer Democrats voted for Democratic candidates. If you had the same numbers turn out that turned out in 2020, Harris would have won. But Democrats were not enthused, and that's partly because of the Democrats didn't have a candidate that generated evidently the enthusiasm. I think Harris actually overperformed, by the way. I think she did a good job, but again, she was caught between a rock and a hard place. The conclusion I draw from this is that the talk about Democrats having a better ground game, which we all heard, and I cited it too, because I heard, reporters were giving reports that Democrats have such a great ground game. As it turned out, they didn't. Now, another reason that they contributed to Harris' loss was Black turnout in 2024 was down dramatically from 2020. The decline in Black turnout was a killer for Harris. Black turnout in 2020 was 13% of the total vote. That's so when you look at exit poll data and you look at the column on percent in that category, that means 13% was put under Blacks. That means 13% of the total votes came from the Black community in 2020. This dropped to 11% in 2024. This represents roughly, out of 150 million votes cast, roughly 3 million fewer voters. And this is a killer because 85% of Black voters who did vote voted for Harris and other Democratic candidates. So this happened to Hillary Clinton, by the way, in 2016. The Black vote was also down. Now, I looked at it more thoroughly, and I didn't put all this here, but I went on that David Leap's presidential atlas, and I looked at the states, and I clicked at areas where the Black populations are large, such as in Philadelphia County, such as in Wayne County, Detroit, and such as in Milwaukee. In all those areas, the Black turnout was much less, and much of it, of course, would have been Black. So these are in key battleground states, and the vote was down. And if you remember what Harris lost by in these states, you can see that the low turnout in these Black in these key battleground states made a difference. Latino vote was, as Democrats have said, was mysteriously down for Harris. So in 2020, the Latino vote constituted 13% of the total vote. Well, in 2024, it was 12%. So it was the same as the Black vote as percentage of the total vote in 2020. But it was also down a percent. Again, you're talking about, that's about 1 million votes right there from Latinos. So Biden in 2020 received 65% of the Latino vote, while Harris only received 52% of the Latino vote in 2024. This cost Harris quite a bit in Arizona and Nevada, where the Latino/Hispanic populations are quite large. Now, for sundry reasons, Harris did very poorly among Latino men, but Harris did overall not very well among men, white men, Black men, and Latino men. Now, Harris won the Black male vote, but actually she lost the Latino male vote. But the Black vote she won was way down from Black men. She won the Black women vote by, I think it was like 90%. It was quite high. That's why she won 85% overall, the Black vote. In 2020, Biden received 59% of the vote from Latino men, while Harris got only 43% of the Latino vote. That's really bad. We only can speculate as to why she lost so much of the Black vote for men. I know it was a shocker for most Democratic analysts that it went down that low. Again, Harris did okay among Latino winning, although 9% less than Biden in 2020. In 2020, Biden received 69% from Latino women, while Harris received 60% in 2024. A drop of 9, again, that's a lot of votes. Now, Harris was supposed to have the big advantage among white women in suburbs. This did not develop. One of the reasons she was supposed to do well was because of the reproductive rights amendments in various states, but as an issue overall. Harris was expected to do considerably better than Biden among white women, but she did not. It was the same for Hillary Clinton. She did not do that well among white women either. She was expected to do well, but she didn't. She outdid Biden by only 1%, 45 to 44%. Hardly something to write home about. The abortions right issue was supposed to greatly favor her among white women, especially in suburbs, but it never materialized. While Biden carried the suburban vote, 50 to 48, Harris actually lost the suburban vote, 47 to 51. And, you know, we heard from all sorts of analysts that that's where the race was going to be won or lost. And it, you know, was certainly a big contributing factor. Harris lost in the suburbs. Of course, among white men, both Biden and Harris got crushed, with Biden getting 38% and Harris getting 37%. Another interesting finding that stood out was that Harris got trounced among Catholics, receiving only 35%, while Biden, being a Catholic, got 52%. A Harvard study concluded that white males feel resentful and left out. This is shown in these statistics. It was a great article written about this, and what it showed was that Harris did well among women, but did not do well among young males. So, and young voters overall have normally voted heavily Democrat in recent presidential cycles, but they didn't this time. Now, when you look at that overall, men from 18 to 29, Harris didn't lose by much among this age group. But when you look at the difference between males and men and women, Harris won handily among young women. So, you know, being looking at these students on campus and teaching them in classrooms, there's quite a difference between what the white students in the classrooms feel about Harris versus what the white women feel about Harris in this age group. But, you know, moving forward, that's a very, when you look at young people voting, that's crucial to not lose that vote. See, Carter lost that vote, Mondale lost that vote, and that's what allowed the Republicans to win 3 presidential elections in a row, because this youth vote was voting abnormally, because they normally vote Democrat, but was voting for Republicans. Not by overwhelming numbers, but enough. Young people have been normally voting overwhelmingly for the Democrats. Another reason for Harris' loss is that the Democratic Party is continuing to lose working class voters once the Democratic base. So let me bring out that Barack Obama, when he was a law student, wrote an article arguing that the Democratic Party is losing its traditional base, the working class. He was right, because there has been growing evidence of this since at least the 1990s. And this base, including white males, is a large group to lose. Evidence can be seen in exit polls. And it's really, kind of stunning to me because I've been following this for so long, but I've seen this transpire. Of those household incomes, this is in the last exit poll, 2024 exit poll. Of those with household incomes over $100,000, these people voted for Harris. Those with incomes less than $100,000 voted for Trump. Those with college degrees voted for Harris, especially those with graduate degrees. Those with no college degrees voted for Trump. You're Democrats, and you know that this is a flip-flop. The Democrats used to represent poorer people, the have-nots, and those without degrees, college degrees. It's totally flipped. With Trump getting those people without college degrees and lower income people. Harris only, and look at this one. I went back and looked more at this today. Harris only won union households by 8%. That's pathetic. It's pathetic for Democrats to be winning union households by only 8%. In 1996, Clinton won by 30%. Well, that's a 22% difference. 60 to 30. In 2000, Gore won union households by 22%, 59 to 37, and Biden won by 16%, 56 to 40. So look at the trend. You see, so it all comes together here. Income levels, educational levels, and now union households with Obama being right. The Democrats are losing their base, their traditional base. Has the Democratic Party become the party of the elite, supporting a lot of issues non-salient to voters? I think so. It needs the Democratic Party needs to reconnect with the working class people to make winning elections easier. Now, it is true, you know, they've lost their base and now they're winning other votes. They're winning people with higher incomes. They're winning people who have college education. So it's not that they can't win, but more people don't have college educations out there. And still more people make less than $100,000 if you look at, medium household incomes. Another reason, and I'm getting to the end here, another reason Harris lost is because voters show disgust and distrust for government and think the country is going in the wrong direction. This has been trending for a very, very, very long time, and since the 1950s and 60s. But in fact, Gallup and other pollsters have noticed that that's the biggest finding by pollsters, that Americans have lost trust in their government. And this, I'm not going to click on it, given what happened, but right here in this Pew Research, Gallup shows the same thing. It shows this dramatic climb from 73% trust in government, public trust in government, all the way down to 19 to 22% having trust in government. To be scholarly here, to quote Confucius, he said that that was the worst thing a society could lose, would be trust in government, because he said in his writings, you know, in these dialogues, he says, you know, if people lose faith in their government, all is lost, because that's the most important thing there is. And that's one thing that worries me about what's happening in American government. Not only has polarization developed at an extreme level, but also trust in government has fallen way down. And those are what scholars say cause revolutions in societies. And historically, when you look at societies and the cause of revolutions, it's when people don't trust their government anymore, and there's bitter conflict within the society between rival parties. So my prediction is, though, that Trump's approval ratings will fall within a very short time during his administration, as they did during his first administration, and that's why he lost. I predict that Republicans will probably lose at least a House in 2026, and probably the presidency in 2028. Now, why am I saying that? Because again, what's happened is that voters have gone back and forth because they're so disenchanted, so disgusted with their government. They don't like who they voted in. That they are always voting for change, and they don't have much choice because you only have Republicans or Democrats. And so voters voted out Republicans in 2008. They voted Democrats out in 2016. They then turn around and vote Trump out or the Republicans out in 2020, and then they turn around 4 years later and they vote the Democrats out. Americans are not comfortable with government or their leaders. Biden made a big mistake not dropping out sooner, allowing Democrats to pick up another candidate with a better chance of winning. As I noted, Harris was put between a rock and a hard place. A better choice, in my opinion, would have been a Southern governor. Southern governors have a great track record of winning the presidency because they are Democrats proving they can win in red states. LBJ, Carter, and Clinton in relatively recent times, all Southern Democrats won. But even Obama came from a Midwest state, which is like a second choice coming from a Midwest state versus, coming from California or the West Coast or coming from the Northeast. That presents problems for Midwest voters and Southern voters. But if Democrats have a Southern Democrat, like a Jimmy Carter, like an LBJ, like a Bill Clinton, they to me stand a better chance of winning. Probably Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky, or Roy Cooper, Democratic governor, both of them are Democrats, of course, from North Carolina, to me would have stood a better chance of beating Trump, assuming no troubling skeletons in their closets. Even Mark Kelly, Arizona, would have been a better choice. Now, the hard reality is, electoral reality is, again, women have never won the presidency. Black women have certainly not won the presidency. White males still stand the best chance of winning the presidency because still enough voters are reluctant to vote for a woman, let alone a Black woman. These are electoral realities substantiated in a lot of studies, a lot of data. What the Trump this is my last slide here, what the Trump presidency represents to me. Well, I have a lot of data, but we're running out of time, but I have a lot of data here showing that authoritarian leaders, as you know, have arisen throughout the world. More so in African nations and in the Middle East, in Asian nations, of course, China and North Korea. But the reason is, but also in Europe, there's been a trend, as in the United States, toward supporting authoritarian leaders. This research here, this Pew Research, which is worldwide, shows that 31% support across the board in 24 countries. They support authoritarian leaders. 32% in the United States. So it shouldn't be, that shocking that Trump's base seems to, like him. And they don't care whether he has authoritarian tendencies. Populists have blamed others for the condition of their country. The opposition party, threats from within, globalization, immigrants, minorities, and the government itself. Of course, Trump has, listed all of those things in his campaign. Trump, leaders such as Trump assume power when conditions have been ripe, and conditions are ripe in America. Widespread ignorance of constitutional principles and the meaning of the rule of law. This was brought out in a study by Flanagan and Zingali, where you can show through testing of people, you ask them questions that apply constitutional principles and the rule of law to simple things. And you ask them whether they approve of it. And what they found was that Americans, a very significant number of Americans, would approve of obvious things that are blatantly unconstitutional, like quashing the press, for instance. That should do so the press should be, silenced so government leaders can function without, having to respond to criticisms, that sort of thing. American people, a lot of Americans believe in that, not the majority, but enough that caused them to conclude that American government was ripe for an authoritarian type of leader to be elected. The fact that the country is, majority of people believe, by far the majority of people believe that the country is moving in the wrong direction. Only about 27 to 33% on average think the country is moving in the right direction. So that's not, reassuring. The rise of white supremacy in the United States and in the particular tolerance of it, particularly by the Trump administration last time and in his campaigns, and the growing intolerance of minorities and endless bitter polarization. These pose threats to civil liberties, our civil service system. Trump wants to gut the civil service system, by the way. Project 25 brings that out, and despite what he says, Project 25 was drafted by people in his administration last time that went to the Heritage Foundation. So First and Fourth Amendment are threatened, especially the undermining of freedom of the press and the rights of free speech and assembly. He now just today has talked about using the Insurrection Act, which allows a president to use the military to supposedly put down revolutions and stuff, not to secure the border more. But Trump says he wants to declare an emergency and use the Insurrection Act. That goes back to, by the way, 1792, 94, when the first provisions of it were drafted. It's known as like the 1807 Insurrection Act, but it actually was used by Adams and Jefferson. Okay, this is my last slide. Sorry, but if you're a Democrat, Missouri is a lost cause for the foreseeable future. Although Missouri was the best bellwether state in the 20th century and just a few decades ago, Bill Clinton won it twice. Missouri has turned deep red since Trump won it in 2016. Missouri controlled all statewide seats except the lieutenant governor's job in 2016, but with a sweep by Trump, 18.5% he won by. He had long coattails and he swept into office all Republicans. And since then, it's been governed by all Republicans. The Republicans have won by enormous margins in this election. Here they are, Hawley by 13.7, Keogh by 20.4, Wessinger by 18.9, Hoskins by 18.2, Malik by 19.9, and Bailey by 21.9%. We never had margins like that. I've been following politics in Missouri for a long time. We never had margins by that normally between Republicans and Democrats. And again, of course, Republicans have a veto-proof state legislature and occupy most judicial seats. So the future does not look bright for Republicans and Democrats in Missouri. Questions?
Wow, that was a lot. If you would, I guess, close your screen out. Wow. I've been tracking some questions on the chat, and hopefully so has Sydney. So I'm going to go through some of them that I picked out first, if that's okay with you, Sydney.
Yes, go right ahead.
And Professor Warren, if you could stop your screen share so we can see your full screen. There you are. Okay. So, not necessarily in the order they were received, but they kind of got my attention. I guess one of the interesting things you said is one of the questions is why was it record voter registration and not record voter turnout?
Well, I've dealt with that issue, by the way, because a lot of it is for what's called forced registration. And that is when you're cornered in a New Republic had a great article on this one time. It's like you're cornered in a supermarket by the League of Women Voters people. They have a table there and they sign you up. What has always been said I've testified in federal court, by the way, on this exact issue. What we've found in studies is that forced registration, that is where people come to your door or corner you somewhere else and force you to register. Compel you, obligate a person to register. If a person is not motivated to register, the person's not going to be motivated to vote. And so a lot of those people were, signed up by people like Stacey Abrams. By the way, they had a pretty good turnout down there in Georgia. But well, I think that common sense would make you realize that if you're sort of obligated to register, it doesn't mean you're going to follow up and vote.
Okay. This just in, I think it's really an important one in case we run out of time. What salient issues should Democrats focus on in the future to win elections?
Well, it's what issues they should get rid of. I have been outspoken against, since Hillary used to wave her arm for gay and lesbian rights and she left the stage if you remember her in 2016. There's nothing wrong with it. I support it, but as a person running campaigns, I've run campaigns, her staffers told her that was not a good thing to do. And because, first of all, they have that vote anyway. What is going to be gained, as her staffers told her? There are many articles written on, the Clinton loss too. And that's why Harris actually didn't push it this time around very much. But Trump did, and associated Democrats with these non-salient issues that probably turn off more people than they turn on. And that is a mistake for the Democrats. What they need to do is focus on steady the issues that are really matter to voters and really focus on these issues and push them. But what I tried to explain in my talk was that the Democrats didn't lose by that much. And so we should not scrap all these things that we have been pushing. It's just that we need to message better on issues that are more salient to the working class. If we, in fact, want to continue to represent that group. Right now, we're not. We're representing more elitist interests in this country.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that criticism, given the data that I showed you, the more affluent people voting for Harris, the less affluent people voting for Trump, the more educated voting for Harris, the least educated voting for Trump. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that we're not representing the working class that much anymore.
Okay. Another question is, was there an impact of voter suppression on this election?
No. In fact, there was a
Okay.
great article in the New York Times on that, about how we should apologize to Georgia because the turnout actually where the voter suppression was supposedly greatest, Georgia had a great turnout. So by the way, studies showed, and again, I've testified in federal court on that too, well, on voter suppression. And the deal is that studies show that at most it has a 2% impact. That's not very much. I mean, 2% would be a lot in a close election, but the suppression doesn't mean it's going to suppress votes from all Democrats.
Right. What are two examples of why people don't trust the government?
Why people don't vote?
No, why they don't trust the government.
Well, this really developed in a big way. So from the, note the dates, goes back to the Vietnam War. And remember, and then on top of that was Watergate. And it was one thing on top of the other that disillusioned a lot of people, and particularly the young people like myself at that time that still were disillusioned by that. Remember, Johnson had what was called a credibility gap. So in the 1950s, there was a lot of trust in the white community anyway, not in the Black community, but a lot of trust for American government in the 1950s. But I was starting in the 60s, trust started to drop with the Vietnam War, Watergate and scandal and other things that turned people off.
Okay, thank you. One of the observations from one of our folks participating is that Lucas Kuntz did well in the rural areas where he did have a media presence. Is that a sign of hope, or was that some kind of an anomaly?
Yeah, I saw that too. Look, he did better than any other Democrat running statewide. Again, he only lost by 13%. The others lost by about 20%. So I think Kuntz was a very strong candidate, but he's running in a very red state right now. And he was running at the wrong time when Trump was running, and Trump is extremely popular in the in this state.
I have one question myself, and then I will ask Sydney if she has any else of the Zoom or any of her own in the interest of time. Uh, Talking about appealing to the working class voters, Josh Stein, I think I have the name right. He was also considered for vice president at one point. In his state, he removed the requirement for a large percentage of the state workers to have college degrees. And I'm wondering if that kind of strategy, or that not strategy, that's not strategy, that's taking a positive action, in my opinion. If that would have echoed with the voters, and if he had been picked as the VP, if that would have made a difference.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an appeal to the working class, obviously, people without college degrees. All I can say on that is that, Democrats, if they want to gain support among those people, they're going to have to do things like that. They're going to have to be much more union friendly. And they evidently are not looking very union friendly. It's hard to believe that Republicans are, but again, Harris won the union vote, but by a pathetic percentage. So I think that, what's healthy about losing is, picking yourself up and regrouping. And, when you think all is lost, 2 years later, you win back the House, and 4 years later, you win back the presidency. I think that's very possible, particularly when I think the American people will not like the second Trump administration. I think it's I think his agenda is extremely dangerous. He wants to gut the bureaucracy. He wants to, there was just an article today on education, on how he, wants to, zero in on all these quote woke programs offered by college universities, Black studies programs, women's studies programs. He wants to, punish people for promoting diversity and inclusiveness and so forth. I don't think that even though I do regard these issues as less salient to most people, I do think that I think gutting the civil service system, starting out with putting Gates in the Justice Department is just totally absurd. I agree. I don't think he's going to get confirmed. But as Mark Van Ack said, he sent me this thing about in Europe, they regard this as a crawl test. They want to see whether or not the senators will crawl to Trump. How far are they are they willing to go to support a guy like Trump?
Yeah. Sydney, do you have any questions queued up?
There was one question, and I think it was particularly about some of the battleground states where you had mentioned that Harris had lost by small percentages. And so somebody asked, why didn't Harris do a recount in those states?
Kenny, you there? Did we lose you?
He's frozen.
Oh no. Okay, well, not much I can do about that. Yeah, I just see a black screen for Ken right now. Okay, well, unless Ken suddenly comes back on in the next few minutes, um, I think he just totally logged off. Maybe he'll be back in. Anyway, thank you all. It'll take, because of the way this was recorded, it'll take a couple of days to convert it around and get it downloaded from the cloud onto our uh, YouTube page, but I will work to get that done. Um, Again, I will ask if anyone has any announcements they'd like to make. Okay, if not, please stay tuned for future meetings. Any suggestions for next month's gathering here, by all means, email myself or to Sydney Jackson.
Harvey, is that by
And
Zoom or is that by Zoom or is that on location somewhere? Because I've not attended meetings before.
all of these meetings are by Zoom at this time.
Okay.
And then tentatively January 12th will be a hybrid in-person and Zoom, and that's Gateway Democrats giving some opportunities, hopefully, for folks to get connected with groups that are meaningful to them to continue working.
Thank you.
I know historically we've canceled our December meeting for the holiday party. Is that still the case?
Oh, well, we haven't talked about that, so watch your emails. Yeah, that's a good point, Sydney. We probably should do something in person. It would be nice for everyone to meet in person every now and then. Okay, stay tuned, and I don't know. We lost Ken. I think his speech was actually somewhat encouraging. Um, the way things are structured, in many cases, it's winner take all, as opposed to a proportionate assignment for the Electoral College. And as you know, all know that the votes would have turned out differently if the Electoral College was proportionate. Um, and I want to thank you. Hopefully, you saw some hope here, and that the election wasn't the landslide or the mandate that some of the Republicans are feeling it was. When you actually look at the numbers, it was actually very close, less than 2% difference in the swing states that could have gone either way for this election. So the American public is still supporting democracy. And hopefully in the midterms, we're going to see another shift back towards a more big D democratic philosophy. So thank you all. and good night.